All right, hello students. This is a continuation of our discussion of the 1930s, but the previous video, if you just finished watching that, was talking about Mexican economic policy. We're going to shift over to the United States and look at US labor policy and also their immigration policy by discussing repatriation. If we have time, we'll then talk about the Bracero program and Operation Wetback. If we do not, we will save that for our next and final video. We're going to be looking at this article in class that will lay the framework for Mexican repatriation. These are questions we will discuss after reading that article, so do check those out if you want to look ahead. Although I realize the slide number is copied from last year, I will fix that when we have class. We will then watch this little clip that is introducing repatriation to us, and then we'll discuss it. So I know that this is US history, so I'm going to keep it rather short. We did not read about this, but it is so pertinent to understanding this entire narrative of migration that you guessed it, you're stuck with someone who loves US history, and even though this is not a US history class, I gotta incorporate it. Okay, so you all know that in the 1930s, not just the United States, but the Western world was facing a global economic depression. And I should add, it's not just the Western world, although because the depression was acutely felt in the United States, other countries in uh, that were in it wasn't the Cold War yet, but I'm still going to use the U.S. sphere of influence as a phrase. They also were very acutely affected by it because of the connected financial networks, trade networks, stock exchanges, foreign investment, you name it. Okay, and we talk a lot about the stock market when we talk about the Great Depression in general, but I want to focus more on the reason why the Depression lasted so long. When I teach US history, I like to say that the stock market crash did not cause the Great Depression. Rather, it was a major symptom of the economic instability that ushered in the Great Depression. It could be seen as a catalyst to the Great Depression in the sense that the fear that the stock market crash ushered in caused the market to fall even lower. And when it bottomed out in the 1930s, unemployment had reached about 25% throughout the United States as a whole. And among certain communities, particularly communities of color, it was far higher than that. So, for example, the unemployment rate at the peak of the Great Depression was more like 50% for African Americans. So, I want to just highlight that background and context for you to understand how important unemployment was in understanding why the Great Depression impacted immigration policy. So now that we understand that, let's talk about what repatriation was. By the time we talk about this in class, you'll already know because you watched those clips. But if you're watching ahead, repatriation, if you think about what a patriot is, what patriation is referring to a country, repatriation means to return to one's country of origin, okay, to repatriate. So the repatriation program was a program that was not nationwide. It varied by state and locality, but at the state and local level, governments in many parts of the United States, particularly parts that had a significantly high Mexican American or Mexican immigrant population, started this program. Okay, so the idea was to attempt to solve the high unemployment problems by deporting Mexicans and Mexican Americans. Now, I'm going to use the word deporting because that is actually literally what happened, but there were some Mexicans and Mexican Americans who did voluntarily leave the country. Some of them were given assistance, financial assistance, to leave the country and return to Mexico. But the reason why I do say deported is because the statistics, the facts, the figures of repatriation are very difficult to study holistically because it was not a nationwide program. Since this was a program that varied by state and locality, it's incredibly difficult for us to know exactly how many Mexicans and Mexican Americans left the country. The low end of the estimates is around 400,000. On the higher end, it's more like 2 million. It's also important to know that this was, we called it, when we say deportation, typically we're referring to non US citizens who are forced to leave the country. But in this situation, it's beyond that. Many of the people who left the country during this program were US citizens, some of whom were the children of immigrants. And because of the 14th Amendment of the US Constitution, anyone born or naturalized in this country is a citizen. But if you were a small child, you were not going to stay in the United States if your parents, either voluntarily because of the assistance that they were given, or involuntarily left the country. A 5 year old kid, for example, doesn't have a choice but to return with their parents. What's interesting about this also for our own local history is that the Los Angeles area actually was the greatest affected area in this entire country. And there was a formal apology by the California government. I do not recall a national apology at this point ever, in 2005. But just to put that into perspective, the United States government apologized for Japanese internment in the 1980s, and Japanese internment occurred during World War II. And so the US government formally apologized for another mistake that they made after less time than this situation here. I don't know if I expressed that clearly, but more time has passed between Mexican repatriation and that 2005 apology than what happened with Japanese internment. Both of them, arguably a dark chapter in US history, one of which has had some sense of reconciliation by the government. One has only had reconciliation from the state government, nothing from the federal government. And everyone knows, regardless of what their opinion is, that immigration policy is still a very controversial topic in this country, particularly with this current controversy rather over border security. Okay, um, I actually think that I want to keep these two separate videos. So we're going to talk about the Bracero program and Operation Wetback, and that is all the information that is fair game for Monday's quiz. So we're in great shape. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for the final one. Thanks.